Hello boys and girls, welcome to another video for our flipped classroom. We're looking at the topic Blueprint of Life, and the concepts that we're looking at are divergent and convergent evolution through natural selection and isolation. Let's have a look at the dot point that we're covering. It says, explain how Darwin and Wallace's theory of natural selection, of evolution by natural selection and isolation accounts for two phenomenon, divergent evolution and convergent evolution. So let's have a look here. A couple of things to remember. Later on, once you've kind of looked at this dot point, and you kind of might get a practice question. A lot of people, it's a big trap, is that we forget this whole idea of isolation. So you can't answer this dot point fully without discussing isolation. So make sure that you don't forget that part. And then looking at these two, we have the divergent evolution is looking at, when you look around and you see all the living things that are different, how do we account for that? And then when we look at all the things that are similar and yet perhaps not unrelated, how do we account for that too? So quite an interesting dot point today. Let's get into it. So I'm going to talk about our two scientists here. We're talking about Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace. And these guys provided us with the theory of evolution via natural selection. And the really cool thing about this whole thing about natural selection is it gives us a mechanism, a physical process by which you can lay out the steps, and if they occur, then you're going to get a result at the end of it. And we see that you've touched on evolution before in Year 10, but we're really going to pull apart natural selection and really see what these guys came up with. Scientifically of importance is that they came up with it independently. Now, if you have an idea and someone else on the other side of the earth has a good idea, and you both flesh it out, and you kind of go, holy hell, we're correct, then it's pretty cool that that's kind of verifiable ideas. So it's a cool thing that they came up independently. All right, so let's have a look at the 5 principles of natural selection. All right, you need to know these off by heart. All right, these you don't, maybe not in crazy detail, but you need to know the steps. So the first one is species produce more young than will survive to a reproductive age. We've all seen those little turtles being hatched from the eggs in the sand, and then all they have to do is get 10 meters into the ocean, and their survival rate goes through the roof. But not many of them do, because they get eaten. The whole purpose of laying so many eggs is that so you increase the chance of that survivability. So in pretty much all populations, species will overproduce. Alright, the next step is variation. So within a hatch of turtles or a litter of puppies, you're going to see variations in what they look like. These variations can sometimes be beneficial, and sometimes they will be detrimental. But the variation exists, and it exists because of generally something called mutation. We cover this later on, but mutation is a naturally occurring phenomenon. All right, it's the pure source of variation that we discuss. All right, so the next one is that once you have too many babies, the babies are all kind of different in some way, shape, or form. They are then going to have to compete in their environment for resources. Straightforward. The next thing is that if you are going to introduce some aspect of competition, then the ones with the traits that allow them to be the better competitor will survive. The ones that are, it's like Hunger Games. If you're a crappy bowman, you're not going to be able to kind of survive in that. It's basically there needs to be some aspect of you that accounts for you surviving. Alright, it could be that maybe you can camouflage. It could be that maybe you can handle drought. It could be that maybe you can handle extreme water levels or chemical toxicity or something. Like you've got to have something that means that in your environment, in your particular environment, you have an edge. That's what survival of the fittest is. It's not the biggest, it's not the baddest, not the strongest, or the meanest. Sometimes it is, but it's something that makes you a better competitor than the rest of your species and perhaps even other species. Alright, so those traits, if you survive, will get passed on through your genes. Alright, on to the next generation. Now, if you're passing on your genes and someone else in your species isn't passing on theirs, then what's going to happen is that you're going to get a change in your population gene pool. Alright, each new generation will have more offspring from individuals that had favourable characteristics from those that didn't. Alright, that's a change in the frequency of that gene. Okay? Alright. So let's look at this in theory. So, we have overreproduction, lots of turtles. Alright, some of these turtles have stumpy necks, some of them have medium-sized necks, some of them have long necks. Alright, all these turtles are competing for food, and the organism with the turtle with the long neck is the better competitor. It is going to be the one that survives, because once all the little short plants get eaten, they aren't going to pass their genes on. They are going to die out, and only the tall plants will survive. So, if the tall plants are the only ones surviving, then the only turtles that will survive are the turtles that can access the tall plants. So this results in a change in the turtle population where only long-necked turtles are living. Alright, we have now got an example down here. We're now going to look at convergent and divergent evolution and what these kind of mean. So, let's look at divergent first. Organisms from a common ancestor are exposed to different selection pressures and are consequently moving further away from each other on a genetic scale over time. So these two foxes, which are somewhat closely related, have very different looking traits because of the environment that they're placed in. Alright, these have a much thicker coat because they need to survive in cooler temperatures, and these guys here, the Australian red fox, while introduced to Australia, it is adapting to Australian environments so successfully because of the it's got the red against the desert, the red against the grass. It's quick, it's nimble, that type of stuff. So closely related but different. They have diverged away because of different selection pressures. Alright, convergent evolution. So convergent evolution is where you get organisms that aren't related in the distant past. In the recent past. They are, we're talking like ancient connections here. They're really not related whatsoever, but they all kind of look similar. So what we've got here is an example of streamlined bodies in sharks, dolphins, ichthyosaurs, which are no longer existing, but we have fossil evidence of them, and penguins, and they all have this streamlined body. And you kind of go, yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock. They've got to be in the water. They've got to be able to move in the water. Well, that's what we're talking about. Convergent evolution is that you need a streamlined body in the water in order to compete for the resources that these guys are after. Sure, you might look at a crab and go, yeah, well, that's not a streamlined body. Well, it's got other things that it feeds on. It's niche when we're talking about here. All right, have a look at the definition up here. The process where organisms not closely related independently evolve similar traits physically, not genetically, as a result of having to adapt to similar environments or ecological niches. Alright, so these are large open water organisms. they are under the same selection pressures or similar selection pressures. What this talks about when we say physically, not genetically, if you think of the movement of a shark, with its tail, it goes side to side, whereas a dolphin goes up and down. And when you go internally into that organism, you're going to see very different internal structures that allow them to propel themselves, but the outside has that streamlined body, which is what we're calling as divergent. Okay, I think that's a pretty straightforward concept. If it's not, feel free to raise some questions in class. Alright, let's have a look at isolation. So, isolation is any genetically conditioned impediment or obstacle to gene flow between populations. So, I wanted to give you a very, the purpose of isolation. It was never given to me when I was growing up, and I always kind of went, I wish I kind of had a better understanding of it. So, the essential role of isolation in evolution is that it's the maintenance of organic variations produced in natural populations through the process of natural selection. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, and I get that, but what you want is, if you're going to have variation in a population, then you don't want to kind of like breed it out. You know, those variations give us all the diversity that we've got today, so we don't want to kind of it's not that we don't want to, it's that if we you can easily lose that if you interbreed with lots of people from different populations, and that's fine, but you lose some of that kind of uniqueness. So isolation isn't just being stuck on an island, although that kind of is one of the forms. All right, so you can't just go, oh well, you know, that organism's on an island, so therefore it's isolated. Yeah, absolutely, you're 100% correct. But there's other types of isolation, and they're fascinating. So let's have a look at them. It's basically, look, there's a couple of, it's a big table here that I've got for you, but I think these examples are really good. Now, just to kind of not freak you out, I'll explain what these mean. Pre-zygotic is basically what happens before fertilization. So what happens before the sperm and the egg have come together. And then post-zygotic is what happens after the egg has been fertilized and the zygote has been formed. The zygote is the first cell of the new offspring. Alright, so we've got 4 essentially pre-mating isolation strategies. So what can prevent organisms from being close to each other and breeding with each other? So you've got temporal, alright, so these are if you are active at different times of the year. We've got frogs that live in the same pond but breed during different seasons, summer versus spring, and so therefore literally will not encounter each other if one is hibernating, or if one is just kind of off feeding, the other one might be in heat. We then have ecological, when 2 species occupy different habitats. All right, so lions and tigers are close enough to be to interbreed, but they just exist in different habitats. You've got one in the savannah and one in jungle. So yeah, that's a pretty isolating feature there. The other one we have is behavioural. Alright, so you have it occurs when 2 species have different courtship behaviours. Alright, so you know, this is the song of my people, blah, 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 blah. And then you know, someone goes, I don't get it, like, is that meant to impress me, type thing. So if you aren't familiar with the mating calls of the opposite sex of your species or a particular population, so you know, maybe you go to France and you try and do your best pickup line, and they're just like, are you kidding me? You know, if you just try and use that Aussie charm, nah, not going to work, right? You isolated from each other, you have different pickup lines, I guess, is what we're looking at there. Alright, so then we've got mechanical. So we've got, it occurs when physical differences prevent copulation or pollination. Now the picture of this here pretty much explains it, but basically, if you know, if the act of sex kills the other organism, the other mate in the process, yeah, it's not really going to be good for the survival of your species. So, as these breeds of dogs have been artificially selected, we'll get into that later, but as you basically create some sort of isolating mechanism in between them. you know, if this was a male and that's the female, that dog can't get up to the female. So you know, that's also another way of making that mechanically isolating. Okay, so let's assume that you know, you've got the act of fertilization down pat. You've managed to fertilize a sperm and an egg. There are also mechanisms that stop this from being a successful production. So, first one is hybrid inviability. So, hybrids are produced but fail to develop to reproduce reproductive maturity. So, certain types of frogs form hybrid tadpoles that die before that they can become a frog. You know, it sucks, but you know, the frog's life cycle is very complex, and they can get to a tadpole and then just can't go through that metamorphosis. Alright, then we have the hybrid infertility. Hybrids fail to produce functional gametes. Now, this is a very, very common one, because we're going to talk about hybridization later on in the course, and you're going to be like, oh, I know about that. So, mules. Alright, mules are sterile hybrids. They result between the mating of a horse and a donkey, but when we look at what their chromosomes look like, you will see that that in fact produces a sterile organism. Cannot have babies, so you get one offspring out of it and then you're done. Alright, and then we get hybrid breakdown. So you get two parents and then you mate them together, and this is the F1 generation. So the first offspring produced by parents, they are fertile, but then the offspring of the next generation fail to develop properly. So an example of this is in copiopods. They have less potential for survival or reproduction. Alright, here's a summary of it, guys. I'm not going to go, it's pretty much just recapping what we've done here, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but just make sure that you go over those steps of natural selection really well. You make sure that you've got examples of divergent evolution and convergent evolution down pat, and that you basically understand that isolation keeps that variability maintained in the environment. Alright, thanks.